thank you so very much, Pastor John and Christine, for that intro. And here we are, generations. This is part 2. And we're really talking about generations and how we can have an effect on the generation to come. Now, you may have heard it said, it's an old African proverb, that it takes a village to raise a child. Raising 5 kids, many times I was wondering where that village is. If I could only find that village, maybe they could help me raise my kids. But I want to tell you that we live in a day and age in which raising a family and marriage is difficult and families are harder. And so that's why we're taking a few weeks here and focusing on families and marriage. And I know what you're thinking, hey, it's a good time to check out. I told you before that don't do that, because at some point in this calendar year, you're going to encounter somebody that's married or somebody that has kids, or you're going to encounter kids. And what I'm about to give you is going to help you in helping them develop and create a generation that knows God and knows who He is. I don't know if you realize this or not, but in the Bible, there's a lot of people there, popular Bible people, that weren't so perfect. Because it's easy to think about our own personal lives, married or not, marriage or families, and think that we have to be perfect in order to be used by God. Let's take a look at these few popular Bible people. David in the Bible was an adulterer. Moses was a murderer. Abraham was a liar. Gideon was a coward, and Jacob was a deceiver. Rahab was a prostitute. Mary Magdalene was demon-possessed. Samson was an alcoholic womanizer. James and John had bad tempers. Matthew cheated people out of money, and Paul hated Christians. But God used every one of them. Hey, I'm just wanting to let you know right off the bat here that God is not looking for perfection. He's looking for a people who won't allow their past to control their future here. The Bible is full of imperfect people with imperfect lives being used greatly by God. Now, I've said this before. I'm going to say it again as a launching point. My marriage and my family are supposed to be a platform that tells the redemption story, tells the story of God's mercy, His grace, and redemption. That's the gospel. And God uses imperfection to tell His perfect story. That's really what this is all about. And that's the story that we're going to tell. And so in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9, here it is. And I love this here. It's my grace. This is like the words of God to the Apostle Paul here, is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. Wow, and that's why I take pleasure in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions. Listen, may our lives and our marriages and our families and our children tell God's story of grace. What's interesting about those verses there, earlier here, the Apostle Paul, just right before the my grace is sufficient for thee, communicates, even though I've received such wonderful revelations from God, to keep me from being proud, I was given a thorn in the flesh and a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from being proud. Now, I want to let you know that your spouse is not a thorn in the flesh, and your kids are not sent from Satan to torment you. No, that is not true. But although it may feel like that at some times. Listen, but what we all need in our life is the grace of God, which takes the imperfections of my life and turns them into something beautiful for Him. This is the gospel story, and this is what's so important to realize, that when I die to myself, when I demonstrate kindness and patience and love and compassion to those closest to me, I'm most like Jesus. And that's what we want for you, is to be most like Jesus. So here's the big idea. Listen, making a generational impact for God can and will happen when we practice these 3 principles. We won't be so enamored with our future that will forsake our present, and we won't let our present be ensnared by our past, and we won't let our past endanger our future. I know those are tricky words, but the bottom line is I'm not going to allow my past, present, or future to control me. I will be moved by God. So, there's a story I want to tell you today. Typically, I can teach stories, but there's no way I can teach you over 12 chapters in Genesis today. So I'm going to tell you a story. But the story, and why am I doing this, found Psalm 78. Now in Psalm 78, it talks about the generations here. And it said that in verse 5, for he issued his laws to Jacob, he gave his instructions to Israel. Now, Jacob's name turned to Israel, and I'm going to cover that in just a little while. But his laws were given to Jacob, and Jacob's life told a story, and that's what story I want to uncover for you today. But here it is, so that the next generation may know them, even the children not yet born, and they in turn will teach these to their own children. So each generation should set its hope anew on God, not forgetting his glorious miracles. So this is it. This is all about generations. So I'm going to tell you Jacob's story so that his story can now affect our story that God is still writing with our lives here. So here's the story. It's in Genesis, basically Genesis early in 25, actually to about 33, but expands a little more than there if you look at other references here. Jacob, here we go. Jacob, the supplanter, the deceiver, that's what his name means here. His life story is contained in Genesis 25 through 33. He's the youngest brother in a set of twins. He's the son of Isaac, a grandson to Abraham. So we see here, now let's just think about this. We see here that the potential in his life for blessings in his family line is so crystal clear. And like that's a powerful line. Oh, Father Abraham in Genesis, and Isaac, his father. So he comes from a good lineage here. But he had a fairly typical family. His mom is Rebecca, okay? And Rebecca, his mom, liked to take control, and she had a husband who let her. Ouch. We're going to unpack that in just a minute here. And Jacob deceives his father into giving him a blessing, into getting his blessing in a different way. So this is just the first couple points. We're just going to stay here for just a little bit. So he's the youngest of twins here, and so he was the second in line. His brother Esau was going to be the one who was blessed. The firstborn received a blessing. Now, because Jacob was Rebecca, his mom's favorite, if I can use that term, she wanted him to be blessed. She wanted him to get the blessing. So what she did was she got Jacob to deceive her husband because she learned from her brother Laban how to be a deceiver. See, we all can learn the wrong things to do. So Rebecca, what she begins to do is she begins to, because she wants her son to have a better future, she gets him to be deceptive here. Now, this is what happens in a lot of families today. We want our children to have a better future, so we forfeit God's way and teach them another way. There's another way to get God's best. There's another way to be blessed. Okay, this is the story that's being unfolded here. So she uses her son to deceive her husband into getting the blessing that was due to Esau here. This is really serious here. So instead of teaching him character, instead of teaching him ethics and proper way to do things, she teaches him to reinforce his name, which is supplanter or deceiver. And she's reinforcing something really negative here. Why? Because she wants her son to have it better. How many parents do I hear that they state over and over, I just want my kids to have it better off than I did. If we don't define what better is, The world will define it for us. And because some parents want their kids to have it better in the future and a better life, they forfeit what really matters, and they're giving them something that really doesn't matter because they get enamored with the future here. This is what she did. See, Rebecca reinforced the negative thing and caused her son to deceive. So let's look at the next part of the story here. So Jacob, after this happens, he runs from Esau here. But in the process of running, he has an encounter with God. Yes, he does. He meets the love of his life, Rachel, okay? But he is deceived by Laban, okay? Remember that word. Remember, that's where Rebecca learned to deception there. He's deceived into marrying her sister. Okay, so first of all here, Jacob, the deceiver. First of all, he participated in doing something outside of God's will, and now something negative is happening to him. In life, some bad things we do, some bad things are happening to us. Either way, it's happening here. So Laban is a deceiver times 10 compared to what Jacob did here. So he switches things up in here. And we need to realize if we're going to teach a generation to fear and know God, they need to realize that actions have consequences and we will reap what we sow. That is such a vital thing that we need to teach here. Now, there's generational curses in our lives. There's things that happen in our lives. And I want to let you know, I don't know what happened in the generations before you, but we don't have to live according to what happened before us. We can break those. We can say it stops here. That's the joy of having an encounter with God. This is it. And this is so important. So when this negative thing happened to Jacob, he didn't try to usurp the process. He stayed, worked it out, and so that he could finally get who he really wanted, Rachel. See, there's going to be a time where, generationally speaking, that we need to realize this is going to happen. There's going to be a test. There's going to be a test to say, am I going to trust God in His way, or am I going to take things in my own hands? Jacob, early in his life, because his mom Rebecca taught him to take things into his own hands, he learned the negative there. Okay, but when it came time for him to usurp it again, he said, no, I'm going to do it God's way here. He didn't double down on the deception. He became a man of integrity and worked it out here. This is what's so important. And this is what we learn here. So let's look at the rest of the story. Are you following this story today? I just think it's so fascinating. Maybe you want to go back and read all these chapters in Genesis here. So the rest of Jacob's story here. He learns to trust God. Not just that, he wrestles with God. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Jacob wrestling with God. There's a lot written about this. The bottom line is this. God initiated the wrestling. And sometimes we think like, I have to wrestle with God and I have to pull him. Really, let me give you a different picture of this. There was a wrestling that was happening, referred to as he wrestled with a man. In Hosea, it says that he was wrestled with an angel. But the bottom line is this. God initiated a wrestling with him so that he could reveal to Jacob who he really was. He could reveal his true identity. And really, when you boil this all down, what happened was Jacob was holding on to God in the midst of trying circumstances. This is a picture of us. If we want to pass something on to the generation, if I want my marriage to be something that God can use, and I want my children to be used of God, we have to hold on to God. We have to learn to grab a hold of God, even in the midst of difficult circumstances, because Jacob wrestled in the middle of the night, very significant. He wrestled alone, very significant. But in the end, he held on to the blessing that God had for him. He makes peace with God and accepts his new identity in God's plan. That's what the result of the questioning, the initiation from God is producing. And as a result of this, it changed the trajectory of his family. This is the gospel story here. This is so important to realize what God's doing here. So he couldn't allow his past or his parents or other things that happened to him and with him control his future. So here's a thought for you. Great quote here. Here it is. Don't downgrade your dream of marriage and family, if I can use that in this term here, to match your history, but let's upgrade our faith to match our destiny. See, many people downgrade the dream in what can be because of their history. But what we see through Jacob and generationally, and this is the story of his life that's still being told generations later here, so powerful, but it's a story of redemption and mercy and grace and empowerment and restoration. So we're going to upgrade our faith today to grab a hold of our destiny here. I'm going to be intentional here. So what I want to do with our remaining time together is give us all some practical things we can do to impact the next generation. And I want to give us some practicality to generational truths. I'm not going to allow my past, my present, or my idea of my future hinder me from experiencing all that God wants to do with me to impart to a generation God's truth. So here we go here. Generational truths. My marriage, family, and future belong to God. That's right. Wow. Faith in God has the power to cover my past, my imperfect past, my imperfect present, but my future belongs to God. It all belongs to God. My marriage is a platform to tell his story. My family is the gospel story of mercy, grace, and redemption. I want you to keep grabbing a hold of that. His grace is sufficient for me. Listen, I'm not going to become too proud on my own. I'm going to be dependent on God here. This is what it is. My children, my marriage, I'm not the owner. I am an ambassador. Big, important point here. I'm not the owner of these things. I'm a steward of my marriage. I'm a steward of my children. And listen, again, I want to remind you, if you don't have children or they're grown, we need to remind each other of the generational impact we can have together. Here's another generational truth. Here it is. We need to be clear and intentional. Clear and intentional. Proverbs 22, train up a child in the way he should go. Now, that word train there really talks about intentionality. That's really what it means there. And the reason I put Mark 10 there is that for this reason, Jesus was quoting there, listen, a man shall leave his mother and cling to his wife, and the two shall become one. And if we're not intentionally becoming one, we will unintentionally fall apart. We will become two. See, so we have to be intentional. Now, again, there's no promises or guaranteed success with God. Some people use this proverb to say, if I train up my child, they're going to be perfect, they're never going to stray. Not true. There is no promises other than if we trust God, we will see him pull through. That means we're going to have insults and hardships and persecutions and everything that go through that. But in the end, his grace is sufficient and he's a good God. And he is not done telling his story with my life, my wife and Natalie and I, and our children's lives. This is the promise that we are declaring even over our adult children even now. And we will continue to do so. So how can I be intentional? May I suggest to you that some podcasts to listen to. A couple of Natalie and I's favorites, Family Life Today. There's one, and Family focus. There's one for marriage and one for parenting. My wife and I, we're leading a connection group right now. We're leading a small group for parents. I'm listening to parenting over and over. Just because I have children right now, 25, 26, 27, 30, 32, we're still learning. We're still gleaning. We're still growing. That's what we're going to do. And so I urge you to be intentional and listen to some podcasts. How about be intentional with friends that you have? Be intentional with some friends, and are you getting input into your marriage? Are you getting good, solid, biblical input into parenting, into who you are? If you're not being intentional, unintentional was just going to cause whatever happens. And that's not the way God created you and me to live. That's so true here. How about this? How about we just learn to say thank you more in our homes? I just went through and just looked at study after study after study. And in one case, they interviewed over 40,000 couples, married couples that have been married for years and decades. The number one thing they stated to why they lasted for years in marriage, get this, they learned to say thank you. Study after study finds the same thing, the same conclusion. In marriages where they learn to just simply say thank you to one another and they're more appreciative of one another, they have more health, joy, and longevity. What would your marriage look like this week? What would your home look like if we just became more appreciative? Saying thank you. It only takes a couple seconds. Oh, wow. In 1 minute a day, we could probably say thank you maybe 30 times. But man, let's be the best thank youers on the planet here. Something practical, clear, and intentional. How about this? In Deuteronomy 6, if you have kids, be very intentional and seize the times. It talks and speaks to, in Deuteronomy 6, seize the times. The drive time, bedtime, dinner time, talk of God's truth. Turn off the radio, turn off the TV. Come on, spend time together. Be very intentional with your time here. Let me try to use this as an example. Statistically, only 2% of children that grow up and get 18, 2% get a scholarship to play sports in college. But 100% of children will stand before God and give an account. Let's live intentional. Better homes and gardens. We spend a lot of time and effort trying to earn more money so our home's better, our cars are better, and all these things. There's 140 million homes in the United States of America. Freestanding homes, okay? Like 140 million. What's the chances yours is going to be in better homes and gardens? I'm not saying we should let our house fall apart, but let's not live for the wrong thing. There's a 100% chance that we're all going to stand before God and give an account for what we did in our homes and how we raised our family and how we handled things. Let's live for what matters most. That's what I'm trying to communicate here. Now, generational truth. Number 3, stop fighting with your spouse and children and start fighting for them. Wow. What would it look like? Listen, if we realize it's worth the fight, again, not fighting with one another, but together we are going to fight to bring out the best in one another, the best in our kids, not just trying to get them to have it better than we did, but we're going to define what is better, more responsible, more faith in God, more trusting in His Word. That's what we're going to live for. We live in a crazy world right now, and there is a spiritual battle going on for our children and for the generation. There's a spiritual battle going on for marriages. Let's speak redemptively of grace and mercy and redemption and restoration to one another. But let's fight according to the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they're mighty in God. And we have to fight on our knees. And we have to realize that it's worth the fight. So we're going to be practical. We're going to offer it all back to God. We're going to learn to be intentional. And we're going to fight for our marriages and for the next generation. When's the last time, if you don't have kids or you're not married, when's the last time you shared with somebody who is married or does have kids, I'm fighting on my knees for you. I'm praying for you. I'm believing God for you and for God's best. Let's never speak negative. Let's speak positive words to one another. This is it. And we need as a church to up our game in the fight. We need to up our game in the fight and up our game in this struggle here. This isn't political. This isn't some kind of a political or educational statement I'm trying to make. I'm trying to say that there's a real war going on. And what we need to do, the war is that I used to be this. Jacob was one thing, but he became Israel. And his name was changed to God will prevail. Why? Because he had an encounter with God. And an encounter with God is the way we fight, with his mercy and grace here. But let me close this time down today with this. Nehemiah 4:14. They were rebuilding something that would honor God. And then, as I looked over the situation, and as I look over the situation right now with marriages and families and what's at stake as a generation, I called together the nobles and the rest of the people. And I've called together the leaders of Bridge City Church. And I'm calling forth for the men right now to stand up here. Don't be afraid of the enemy. The enemy is not in your house. The enemy is the devil himself, which wants to steal, kill, and destroy. Remember the Lord. Remember him who is great and glorious. And fight. Fight for your brothers and your sons and your daughters and your wives and your homes. Let there be a fight that we're going to live with biblical principles. We're going to live passionately loving God, passionately loving his word, passionately passing things on to the next generation, not based on our past, not based on my present, but based on the future that God has for us. And we are going to increase our faith to match our destiny. That's what we are going to do. So we're going to fight in such a way that with intentionality, and because our homes belong to God, and we're going to intentionally do this. So this week, what can you do to intentionally be generational in your thinking and the generational truths? How can we use Jacob's story to help us begin to tell our story of redemption? Yeah, bad things happen. Yeah, we've made bad mistakes. But that will not control my future, and neither will it control yours. This is what's so important. We are building something that's going to produce in the long run. In Psalm 128, it speaks of an olive tree, and our children will be as olive trees. Olive trees are significant here. And the reason is listen, they can live to be hundreds of years old. But when you plant an olive tree, the roots go down and they can grow in not so good soil. So stop looking at perfect circumstances. Your kids in the next generation can grow in not so good circumstances. Okay? But the roots will go down and they start to bear fruit about 5 to 6 years. They can produce a little more fruit 9, 10, 12 years. But you know where an olive tree bears its best fruit? Years 30 through 70. May we live generationally, thinking beyond what we can see in our children now and see them when they're 30 to 70. That's right. May we see beyond where they are and see them as they're 30 years old and 40 and 50 and 60. Do you know what that tells me at 58 years? I still got lots of years of fruitfulness left. And you do too. That's the best years. And God wants us to produce fruit. But if we will sow and live generationally and live with these truths breathing and existing in our lives, we can truly live for Jesus and we can impact a generation. This, my friends, is awesome news. Let's live generationally and let's put these into practice. Now, I don't know where you are with God right now, but in order to have a good harvest with God, what we really need to do is this, is it starts with a relationship with God. And if you don't have a relationship with God, you're at the right place, because we want to help you have a day-by-day relationship with God the Father through Jesus Christ. And it starts by saying, I'm imperfect. I have failed. I have messed up. Some bad things have been done to me, and I have done some pretty bad things. But I want to have an encounter with God. And the encounter with God that we're so in need of is this: Jesus, be the forgiver of my past. Would you cover my past, Jesus? Please forgive me. And then, Jesus, be the leader to my future, and use my life to affect others for generations to come. That's the power of a relationship with Jesus Christ that God wants us to have. And if you would like to pray that prayer, let us know. Communicate that to us so we can pray for you. We can help you take your next step. That's one of the most important decisions you'll ever make in your life. And then we can help you figure it out. We can help you figure out what it means to be a follower of Christ. As a matter of fact, in the upcoming weeks here, we're going to be giving you an opportunity to submit questions that you have. That's right, questions that you would like to see answered, and maybe topics that you would like to see covered. And we're going to listen, and we're going to sift through them, and we're going to be answering. After Easter, we're going to be doing a whole series. We're going to be doing a whole series on questions that you have, topics that you would like to see covered, and how we can help you understand God in a more meaningful way. So you got to keep tuning in. You got to keep coming back, because we are going to help you live not in your past, not only in your present, but live the future and the destiny that Jesus has for your life. Man, this has been so much fun with this generational series. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I'm so amped about our next series coming up starting next week, that He is. Who is this Jesus? And what are some of the things that He did leading up to the crucifixion, the death, burial, and resurrection? It's going to be awesome. Won't want to miss it. See you soon.